I get asked, like, what did you learn on this movie? Or what did you learn on that movie? And usually I struggle to come up with good answers because it feels like, well, you learn so much and you keep evolving as a filmmaker. But here are some random lessons learned in no particular order. Things get exponentially harder the more characters you have. For every movie that I've directed, the cast keeps expanding. It's just more and more characters. And in every movie, they have a dinner scene where they sit down and talk. And, the more characters you have, it just gets really tricky with just blocking and, the coverage of it. You have to do a lot of coverage. Like, it might feel like, oh, that's the easiest thing in the world, just people talking. But, you have person A talking to person B, so you need to have coverage for that. But then person A talks to person C, and now you need new setups for that. And then person D gets involved, and all of a sudden it's all these setups. On Annabelle Creation, there were moments where it's like, well, let's just try something different and something simple. And then you start doing that and you realize, well, no, we actually need the camera over here. And then we need a camera over here. Shazam has been the worst one so far because at the end of that movie, you have the 5 foster kids, you have Shazam, you have Sivana, you have the 7 deadly sins, and it's 14 characters to keep track of, and they all need things to do. So on that movie, I had to do like an overhead map with all these sort of icons of characters moving around on it just to keep track of it all and to figure it out. Because when you see the finished result, it seems very obvious, like, well, that character's over there, that character's over there, and they're doing their things, right? But it actually took a lot of figuring out. And even though I did all that, you still run into little issues like, okay, we cut to this angle of Freddy, but now it feels like he's all alone because all the other characters are off camera, so you have to like shoot a little extra piece of Mary and on a blue screen stage and comp that in there so it doesn't feel so dead. So basically, more characters equals more problems. Something to be aware of. Good sound is more important than a good image. That's my opinion, but here's a little test. I'm going to show you a clip in 2 different ways. One with really shitty video and one with really shitty audio. Now imagine that you have to watch a whole film that's in one of these 2 ways. What would you choose?
Make sure you make him feel at home.
They seem nice, but don't buy it. It gets real Game of Thrones around here.
Make sure you make him feel at home.
They seem nice, but don't buy it. It gets real Game of Thrones around here.
Now, recording good sound is perhaps not as sexy as capturing really good-looking images, but it is just as important, if not more important. And capturing good sound is hard. So, when Lotte and I were making our shorts, we wouldn't even bother with recording sound when we were shooting. We would just add it all in post. So, if you don't spend the time doing it when you're shooting, you're going to have to make up for it in post. That said, fixing audio in post is a lot of times easier and cheaper than to fix a lot of other things in post. So on the day, while shooting something, I might prioritize getting it in camera right and then worry about sound in post. But don't forget to worry about sound in post. Resolution matters way less than you think. When Lotte and I were making our shorts, I used to care about resolution a lot. Like, you have to capture with as much resolution as possible, and you don't want to do anything to the image in post that sort of degrades it. But having now done 3 movies in Hollywood, where I've seen what you can get away with, like we zoom into images all the time, blow them up, and looking at the movie on big IMAX screens, it's fine. Like, it's so much more important what kind of pixels you have rather than how many pixels you have. Because a good contrasty image with like good dynamic range will appear to be much sharper than it is. I mean, I've been fortunate to see a lot of the things I've done on really good monitors and screens and compare like film and video and all these things. And like on Shazam, I was looking at this one monitor that looked super high res. And I was like, oh, is that a 4K monitor? It's like, no, it's an HD monitor, but it had HDR, high dynamic range. And it was so contrasty and nice that it just looked like it had all the resolution in the world. So, I'm not saying don't shoot 8K or something if you have that kind of camera. I'm just saying if you don't worry about it. Don't forget urgency. I've seen this in first-time filmmakers features, and I know it's a trap I've fallen into myself, where I think it happens because you come from little short films where everything moves really quickly, like, oh, put the camera here, boom, done. Put the camera here, boom, done. And like you keep that energy up. And then on a film set, there's a lot of just waiting around. You're just sitting there and actors are just waiting around, and it's hard to like keep up that energy and to sort of track where you are. Or sometimes even like it feels like a take has energy just compared to what you were just doing. But then you cut the movie together and you're like, why isn't she more afraid? Or why aren't they running, instead of just walking? Or sometimes, the scene has a good energy, but then you cut to the next scene and it's all gone. So it seems very obvious to, really think about where you're coming from and where you're going and to discuss that with your actors. But it's something I see, being missed sometimes. Aim for 200% to get 100%. They say the camera adds 10 pounds to people, but I think it also takes away some of the awesomeness or sort of dulls things down a little bit sometimes. So I find that sometimes you kind of have to exaggerate things, make them bigger to sort of reach what you're going for. You kind of have to aim beyond your target to actually land at your target. It's weird, but it's, everything from like camera moves that on the day in isolation, it might feel like, oh, that's a crazy thing. But then when you see it, it's not actually that crazy. Maybe we should have done it with an even wider lens or made a bigger move, or maybe, the acting should have been bigger as well. I rarely find myself in the edit going like, oh, I wish this was smaller and less extreme. But many times it's the other way around. I wish it was more. I wish it was bigger. I wish it was a little bit more exaggerated. And it goes from everything. I mean, in particular, things like action, sometimes performances, but even little things like, the house in Annabelle Creation. When I first saw it in real life, it felt like, oh, this is maybe too stylized, the way it's sort of worn and spooky. It almost like it should be in like a Tim Burton movie with a more sort of heightened reality. But then you see it in the movie and it's like, well, it's just a creepy old house, And at the end of that movie, when all the girls are running out of the house, there are light bulbs popping. And I told the physical effects guys that to Michael Bay it, like, just go big, and I would sparks and shit flying. And yeah, you see it in real life. Like if that happened in here, it would be like, holy shit, what was that? But in the movie, it's just like, yeah, it's light bulbs popping. So, don't hold back and don't be afraid to go for it. It's all about the ending. I learned this on my first movie, Lights Out, where, we had a test screening and I was sitting there in the audience and they were laughing, they were cheering, and it was like, it felt like they're loving this movie. This is great. And then I saw the test scores and it was clear that they didn't quite love the movie. And I was like, what happened? Well, it turns out they didn't like the ending. We sort of overstayed our welcome and tried to do a little too much stuff. So what we did was we had another test screening, showed the audience the exact same movie, but we just ended it 5 minutes earlier, just cut it right there. And now the test scores went through the roof. They loved it. So a bad ending can undo almost everything you did before it. And likewise, a good ending will have your audience forgive so much. Like maybe the movie dragged, maybe it wasn't that great in places, but if you have a good ending, they will love it. Your first cut will make you depressed. So, on Lights Out, I was told by the producer that when you see the first cut of the movie, you will think it is garbage. And even though I was told this, I was like, I saw the movie and I was like, well, I'm sure other directors think it's garbage, but this is garbage, even though I was told that. And of course, it's not. You just have to work more with it, like cut out all those little things you hate and sort of massage pieces and try some different things, and then you get better sound in there, better images, and and then it's not that bad. But the first time you see the very first cut, you will be like, oh, this is terrible. And it's not. I guarantee it. Or at least not as bad as you think. Depression is inevitable. The best time in making a movie is right before you make it, like when you're in pre-production, because then you haven't shot anything yet, and there's just endless possibilities. The movie could be anything. It could be the best movie in all of cinematic history. Then the first time I get depressed is usually about halfway through. And this happens whether it's a feature or a short or any creative endeavor. Halfway through is sort of when reality sets in that, okay, it's not the best thing in the world ever. In fact, it's not even that close to what I had in mind. And that's depressing. But then you sort of, you deal with that and go like, okay, it's not what I had in mind, but it can still be something good. I can still make it the best version of what it is that I can. And it gets better. Then the second time I get depressed is when I see the first cut, as previously mentioned. And the third one, and this is the big one, is after the movie's done. It's out there in the world, everything's done. And it happens every time, like clockwork. When Shazam was winding down, I was like, well, I'm about to be depressed. I know it's coming. I might as well brace for it. And, depression is a son of a bitch, because not only does it feel like you will never get out of depression, it even somehow tricks you into thinking that everything that came before was shit as well. But it wasn't. And, I've been through it so many times now, and it's so regularly that I know it will pass if I just weather it out. But it never feels like it will pass when you're in it, but it does. And I think it happens for a couple of reasons. One is just a change in routine. When you're creating something, you have a purpose, you have a goal, you know what you're doing, right? And when you're making a movie, you're doing it together with other people. So you hang out with them every day, you have fun together. And then one day it just stops and everyone's gone, and it's like, oh, well, what now? And I think another reason why it happens is because of all the movies we watch and the stories we tell. They're all very similar, and that they're usually about a person who's not very happy with life. Things aren't that great. But then they go on this adventure, or they take on this endeavor, they face adversity, but they go through it, and then at the end, they get the girl, they get the money, they live happily ever after, and they've changed. They've become a better person. But in real life, it doesn't quite work that way. Because when you're done with it, yeah, maybe it was a success. Maybe have a little bit more money. Maybe things are pretty good, but you're still you. So if you were a self-doubting, self-hating, miserable son of a bitch before you took on this creative endeavor, after it's done, it's kind of back to being a self-doubting, self-hating, miserable son of a bitch. So that's something you have to work on sort of outside of movies and all of that. For me, the most depressed I've ever been was probably when I was in my 20s, living in Sweden. I was single, I was unemployed, I was broke, I was still living at home, and like Hollywood, that was on the other side of the planet. That's never going to happen. Like, I just wanted a job. I was miserable. And that's when I sought out help, and I started eating antidepressants, and things got better. Because the thing is, if I would have killed myself back then, I would have missed out on so many great things. I would never have reconnected with and gotten married to my childhood sweetheart. We wouldn't have made movies together. We wouldn't be in Hollywood. I wouldn't have directed 3 features now. And even little stupid things like the big gap I had between my teeth has gotten smaller. I still have ugly ass teeth, but they're tight. So I guess for me, the most important lesson of all is stick around, because you don't want to miss out on all the awesome things that are in your future. Bonus tutorial. Here's how to do a blurry animated background that you can put text on. Take an embarrassing photo of yourself from the past, scale it up, then blur it until it's less embarrassing. Overlay a second copy of the embarrassing photo, scale that up as well, and don't forget to blur. Add a vignette, play around with the hue, add some grain, darken the top and bottom, and then animate the scale and rotation differently for the 2 images. Now you just add some text and boom.